Hello. So I got an email that had a pretty good question. What happens if you've flattened a mask or applied a mask? Is there any way to retrieve your work? And that's actually a really good question. So I've got a duck. I tossed a passable mask on. I'm going to say passable because there are 3 points that you want to make sure a mask will work if you want a really, really good mask. So just a quick aside. I have a color fill, and you can get these pretty easily. Let me throw that one away. Just go to this black-white adjustment icon in the layers palette, click on that, and go to solid color at the top. That will allow you to select a color and tell it okay. I'm just going to drag this down. It's just an adjustment layer. I'm going to drag it down, and you can change the color just by double-clicking and picking whatever you want. So let's take a quick look at this mask. We can see that when it's on a very light background, it looks all right. When it's on a light gray background, it's passable. It starts to fall apart around gray, and by the time you get to black, you can see some fringing on it. So if you're ever hired to do some masking for someone, always ask them what sort of background do they plan to use it for, because that's going to let you know how much you're going to want to charge them. If it's an object that's looks like it'll be pretty easy to mask out, you're probably set to make sure it'll work on all three. But if it's something that has like a lot of strands of hair and you're having to really dig in there, but it's on a light background, you may be able to get away with some fringing if it's going on a light background in the end. But if it's the photo was taken on a light background, it has hair everywhere, and it's going on a dark background, you're going to want to charge them appropriately, because guess what? It's going to take quite a while to get all the fringing gone. And if they say they don't know, you're going to have to charge them for all 3 points so you can make the best mask. So just that quick aside. All right, so let me duplicate this and throw away this mask so that I just have, and the way I did that, by the way, to duplicate, I just dragged it down to the new layer icon, and that produced a duplicate. And then to get rid of the mask on the duplicate, I'm going to go to the mask in the little thumbnail here, and I'm going to drag that thumbnail to the trash can, and it'll give me some options. Do I want to apply? Do I want to delete? How do I want to do this? I'm going to delete. So we have just the duck with its original background. We're going to need this in a moment. Okay, so the question was, what happens if you've applied this mask? And there are a few ways to do that. You could right-click on it, and you could go Apply Layer Mask. And now notice it's just a layer with a transparency. The mask is gone in the thumbnail. Let me adjust the preview on here. I'm just going to go to the panel options. Oh, I already have it at the largest. I was hoping for a slightly larger thumbnail, but looks like that's as big as it gets. All right, so you can right-click on it, and you can tell it Apply Layer Mask. You can drag it to the trash can, and you can apply it, which I think is dangerous. That's a good way to lose your mask. Or if you have another layer and you had something going on that layer or not, if you merge down, and the shortcut for that's just Control E, but you can also click on the flyout menu on Layer and tell it Merge Down. Notice it says Control E, and click on that, and it's there. So what's happened is that the mask has essentially been applied, and let me talk about what that means. I'm going to, let's name this duck, and I'm going to duplicate the duck one more time, just so I can show you something here. So we've got the duck, this copy of a duck. Let me turn it on. If I control click on this layer, it will select everything that's white. Let me deselect with Control D. I'm going to Alt click on this layer mask. That's what I meant to say, not layer, but Control click on the layer mask. I'm going to Alt click on the layer mask for just a moment. We can see the slapdash mask on here. Now I'm going to Control click on it so we can see what happens. And what it's doing is it's selecting the white. And if we had something like gray, let me deselect real quick. B for brush. Actually, let's do this. I'm going to make a small gradient. And I'm just going to do a little marquee box. And then I'm going to, under the paint bucket, grab the gradient tool. Just do a black to white gradient. And I'm going to deselect with Control D. Watch what happens when I Control click now. What's happening here? If we go into quick mask mode, we can see that what's happened is essentially a feathered selection. As we go from white, where everything when I control clicked, white, everything selected, to black, where nothing selected. So at 50% gray, about half of it selected. And so they pull that off with essentially a feathering effect. So we've got that going on. And let me just step back a couple of points. Doom. There we go. And deselect. I just Control Z. So let me come back. Now, as I was saying, if I control click on this mask, it will select all of the white. I'm going to go to my duck copy, turn everything else off, just have the duck copy. I'm just going to, you can see that I missed a spot when I was doing that mask. Like I said, it's pretty slapdash while I was doing that mask. I'm going to invert the selection, and that's just the same thing as select and then inverse, wherever that is, inverse, or Control-Shift-I, and I'm going to press delete. So what's happened is I've erased all of the pixels. That they're just thrown away. But in throwing it away, what I've left behind is a transparency, and I can prove that by just changing the color of my background. So if I had like a green going on here, you can see the green. Like literally, it's just a transparency. Now that's the same effect as applying the mask. So here's the duck with the mask. And I'm going to duplicate this one more time, just real fast because I want to show you the differences. I'm going to right click and apply layer mask. So here we have the duck with the applied layer mask, the duck with the pixels deleted, and the duck with the layer mask on. Now the duck with the layer mask on and the applied layer mask should be identical. However, the duck where I deleted the pixels, depending on my settings and the version of Photoshop, it may cut in a little bit more, as the delete may ignore some of the anti-aliasing that occurs. And so it's an interesting way to defringe stuff. See, you can see that. Let me zoom in some more. See these pixels? When I deleted it, it fuzzed it in a little bit more. So here's the applied. I mistyped that, whoops, and deleted. And so I'm going to put this underneath. So you can see where that is. And now just for, to really prove it, here it is with the layer mask. Here it is deleted. So I wanted to show you that so you know that applying the layer mask is different from deleting a selection. All right. So all of that aside, let me get rid of this one. We have now destroyed pixels. They're gone. If we were to save this, quit, and reopen, they're gone. They're not stored in Photoshop anymore. But what is stored is the transparency. Anytime that you erase a floating layer, a free floating layer, that's not really a good term for it. Anytime you erase on a standard layer, you'll be essentially adding transparency. You're really deleting the data, but the transparency is now holding that place. So everywhere we see green is transparent. Now, here's something interesting. When we control clicked on the mask, we were able to load in the white area as a selection. If you control click on a layer, all active pixels will be selected instead. So what that means is if we go to the duck, and I'm going to zoom out a bit, and this is just the original duck. If we control click on the layer, notice when I hold down control, the hand icon gets a little selection square. If you control click on the duck, since all the pixels are active, it gets everything. Now if we erased a chunk away and control clicked on the duck, then this area right here is left alone. And let me just fill this with a color. You can see that that's the truth. And if I turn off the background, we can see that it is erased all the way through. Let me undo all of that damage. All right, so control clicking on a layer selects the active pixels. And so here's something fun as well. If we have a gradient that goes to transparent, we control click. It looks like a straight line, but if we view this in the quick mask mode, by clicking on the Edit in Quick Mask mode. That's just Q on the keyboard for the shortcut. We can see that it is in fact feathered, a feathered selection. And if you don't remember what feathering is, it's essentially adding some fuzz around the, it's not a very technical way of putting it, but it's hopefully will jog your memory. So let's say we have an ellipse. Sorry about that. I was in Quick Mask mode. Let's say we have an ellipse. In Quick Mask mode, we can see how hard that line is. Get out of Quick Mask mode. If we go to Select, Modify Feather, and add, say, a 10 pixel feather, this will make it very soft. What does that mean? If we click on Quick Mask mode, we can see how soft this is. This is the same sort of thing when we go over brushes as having a hard brush. So I make a nice big brush here. A hard brush, 100% hardness. I just right click there, as compared to a soft brush. I'm going to have 0% hardness. And you can see what's basically going on is that it's creating a feather. It's creating let's bring this up so we can really get it. It's increasing the transparency of the pixels the further they get away from the center of the brush. That's all that's happening. So why did I talk about that for so long? Well, this is going to be important in just a moment. So we've applied a mask, and let's say that we've saved it and it's gone, and now we're never going to get back the data. Well, that's true. The data is gone. The mask has been applied. But just because the data is gone doesn't mean that the mask is gone. So what does that mean for us? Well, it means this. So we've destroyed this image. However, if you still have the original image floating around somewhere, like the duck, we can recreate the mask. So let me just move this one far away so that we can see what we're working on. We've got the background layer, the color fill one. We've got the applied duck, and we've got the original duck image. I'm going to control click on the applied duck. And what that did was load all of the active pixels. And if there's any smoothness due to a soft brush, that will be loaded in as a feathered selection. We can see this by moving to Quick Mask mode. Wow, that doesn't mix well with green, does it? I'm just going to toss that to white. Oh, that's better. Okay, we can see that by moving to Quick Mask mode. The areas where my mask was kind of choppy, sure enough, it's fairly soft going in. Where it's crisp, we see that it has a hard line. All right, so it's loaded in. And again, I did that one last repetition because that's a great way to remember stuff. Control click right there. All of the active pixels are now loaded in. Great. Just going to turn off this layer. So we have this selection. Well, what's a selection? A selection is your first step to a mask. It's really the same thing as a mask. It's just not stored as a mask. So I'm going to go back to the original duck, and I'm going to click on the mask, the add layer mask. Now this is going to be the reverse of what I want. Oh, I'm sorry. Usually alt click. So if I were to alt click, I just undid alt click, it would be the reverse of what I want. So you got to be careful and just standard click. Boom. And voila, the layer mask is back. And let's do a comparison real quick between the two layer masks. So I'm just going to move in. Here's the original down here and the new one. You can see that there was a little bit of data loss because it was converted to a selection and then brought in, but it's not bad. It's a pretty good way to bring back a mask. So if you have applied a mask or you flattened something down, the mask is gone. You've erased pixels. But the data you need to start recreating that mask has remained, which means that you can start taking steps to rebuilding the mask and you don't have to start from scratch. So this is important to remember in case somebody flattens your layers or you accidentally flattened it or applied it without thinking and you saved it and it's gone. All that's a good way to return it. So the question here, and there are times actually where you do have to flatten things or apply layer masks to get the effects that you need. When you run into those, my recommendation is to duplicate your layer or save a new copy of your file before you do that so that you don't just lose the data and have to rework things from scratch. So what do you do if you really, really, really don't want to have the layer mask sitting around, but you also don't want to lose it? Well, I would make it a smart object with the layer mask applied. The way you do that is the standard way. You can either click on it, or you can either right click in some of this gray space on the label, and you can tell it to convert to smart object. That's the same thing as just making the layer active. And that's not the same thing as having it on. You have to have it the active layer. So I've clicked on it. The properties are for that layer. I'm going to go to layer, and I'm going to go to smart object and convert to smart object. Same thing as the right click, convert to smart object. So now I have a masked duck, but I can't see the mask because the mask, if I double click on the thumbnail, is stored inside of, voila, the original image, the smart object. Now, one warning on this, it did crop me down, which is not something that I would normally want to have happen. So how do I prevent that? Let me close this real quick. We don't want to have that open. And let me undo. Oops, undo. There we go. So we get back to the original. And I'm going to disable the layer mask. And the way you do that is just shift click on the layer mask so that it's back to the original image. With the layer mask disabled, go ahead and convert this to a smart object. And this time I'll do the right click, convert to smart object. Now go into the smart object by double clicking the smart object thumbnail and re-enable the mask. Notice it didn't crop anything down. Re-enable the mask. Shift click, voila. Save. Notice that I've got this star, meaning that it's not saved. And sure enough, if I go back to the original, we're looking at the full duck. Save, Control S, and voila, it will update your original. So I'm going to close this so I don't forget about it. There we have it. So that's a great way to store a layer mask where it's available for you to edit later or retrieve as needed. And on newer versions of Photoshop, this is a slightly older version, you can essentially release the smart object with a right click and you convert it to layers, and then you can get right back to your layer mask and enable or disable it. So that's how you retrieve or at least rebuild accurately a layer mask. Remember, those pixels are gone, so you will need to locate your original image. Hopefully you've kept that around. Otherwise, you may want to do a reverse Google image search if you used a copyright-free image. And if you don't know how to do that, go ahead and shoot me an email. I'll show you how to do that. Otherwise, if it's your own photo, make sure you've got backups. Just keep those around with you. All right, I hope that answers your question. I think that it was an excellent question. If you have any other questions, do please email me, and I'll be happy to make a short video on what to do under what circumstances. All right, have a good one, and I'll see you next time.